to another edition of Lenny and Elliott's podcast, When Giants Were Giants, as we take a deep dive into the 86 Super Bowl champion, New York Football Giants, with Leonard Marshall, the two-time Super Bowl champ. I'm Elliott Kalb, Mr. Stats, and today we are joined, and so happy to be joined, by Paul Dottino, a beat writer who is going to be going into his 39th straight season covering the New York Giants. Paul literally knows, in the Jersey guy vernacular, where the bodies are buried. Paul, thanks for being with us.
I must say, I have no idea where Hoffa is.
That's a good one, Paul. That's a good one.
They couldn't tear down Giant Stadium without your approval. Come on. You know where everything is in that area.
Well, you know what's funny? There are those who think he actually reached up from the turf and knocked that ball out of Jerry Rice's hands during that playoff game.
That was early in the blowout game, and that set the tone, right, for the 49-3?
Exactly.
Way to go. Well, then he did get an assist on that, Hoff, I believe, right?
I'll tell you what, over the years, there have been so many stories about him, but I kind of favor the funny ones about him being in the Meadowlands.
All right. Hey, Paul, tell us about, you came in 1983, Leonard's rookie year. You both were rookies together. What was it like interviewing a 21-year-old Leonard Marshall?
Well, it's funny because I was at Fordham University as a sophomore at WFUV, the famous student radio station, and that's where I started. I created the Giants beat for the station. And so it was such a thrill for me because I had wanted to be a Giants announcer ever since I was 5 years old. It was the only job I ever wanted to have. And so here it is in my first season in 83, and Leonard Marshall is this big, huge defensive lineman coming out of LSU, and the Giants had so many high hopes for him. But Lamar Leachman was the defensive line coach, and he used to ride Leonard at practice, something fierce. I mean, Lamar had this loud, barking voice, and he would just go at it tooth and nail, and he would really get Leonard hot under the collar. Now, if you knew anything about Leonard in those days, he was a very, very imposing figure. And, people were always like, how far is Lamar going to push him? And you could see that Leonard would boil a lot. Well, there's this one day in the locker room, I guess it was probably right after the midpoint of the season, and I had asked to do a feature interview with Leonard for the radio station. So the PR people had said, all right, wait till after practice. We'll let you come into the players' lounge and we'll get Leonard for you. So I go into the lounge, and I'm sitting there minding my own business, and all of a sudden Leonard comes in, and he plops himself down on the chair, the little like sofa they had there. It was like a leather sofa. And he sits himself down, and you could see he's just beside himself. He's just aghast. He's clearly full of anxiety because Lamar had really ridden him hard that day. And so here I am thinking to myself, this is not good for me. Because Leonard Marshall is not happy, and I got to interview him about, what's going on with this team and who they're playing this week. And obviously, he's had a rough day at practice. Well, the cool thing about it was Leonard had watched me, I suppose, like all the players do. They watch the media, and they kind of get a feel for who the good guys are and who the bad guys are and who's going to cause trouble. I guess Leonard must have, and we'll have to ask him here, he must have figured out with his antenna that I wasn't there to crucify him, and I wasn't there to rip him, and I wasn't there to beat on him like Lamar did or any of the writers who were already saying, well, this rookie may not live up to his potential. I was just there because I'm an eager young reporter. I want to talk about football. I want to talk about the game, and I want to talk about his experience coming to the Giants. And so I guess within the first minute or two before I started the recorder, I just started to warm up a little bit. Just, hey, how you doing, man? Seriously, I mean, this is really cool. We're both rookies here. And Leonard just calmed down, and a smile came across his face. And Leonard, you may not remember this, but right then and there, you actually said to me, "I know you're one of the good guys." And then we started the interview, and I will never forget that because you were incredibly intimidating as a presence. And I was so glad that you calmed down enough to give me a good interview.
Well, the one thing back in that time, there were three guys in the locker room that I knew that were the class of the writers that were actually working with the Giants in terms of beat writers. Yourself, Dave Klein, and Jerry Eisenberg, and you were the youngster of the group. However, the two vets, Jerry and Dave, were they were their own different style character, and Dave was that aggressive, assertive guy, and Jerry was that laid back guy, and you were that young lion that was just trying to break your way in and try to get to know the players. And I saw that in you by the way you interviewed me and the way you interviewed Terry Kennard and some of the young guys on the '83 that were part of the '83 draft. So it was important for me early on to establish that type of rapport with you guys because to be honest with you, I'm a fish out of water, man. I come from a little small place in Louisiana. Sure, we played in front of 90,000 people in Baton Rouge, but 17 million people, 13 newspapers, 17 networks in New York. You're in the media capital here, so you got to watch what you say and watch what you do and watch how you walk and walk with swagger, and at the same time be conscious of your environment. So you guys treated me very well, despite the treatment I received while trying to, become a player in the scheme of things with the Giants, and that was big for me my rookie year.
Now, Leonard, you bring to mind, and Paul was talking about some of the other beat writers, Vinny Detrani and the Channel 9, the sweater, Russ Salzberg, but we can rattle them off now more than 30 years ago because let's remind people, the coverage of the New York Giants or anybody, this was before social media. This was before all sports talk radio. There was no WFAN in before 1987. So I'm sure what the writers wrote, the players and the coaches would read the next day with great anticipation, and it carried some weight, right, Paul?
Well, and Leonard could tell you this. In the middle of the Giants' locker room, they had a couple of tables, circular tables set up. They were wooden tables. They were low, and there were some chairs around each of the tables. And there were often the daily newspapers were on those tables. You remember that, Leonard?
Oh, yeah, like yesterday.
And so there was no doubt that not only did what the writers write carry a lot of weight with the public because that was the basis for the coverage in those days, but you also knew that those words were making their way into the locker room.
Yeah, you knew the players were going to read it. You knew the players were going to read it.
We were all the benefits of having Bill Parcells and then Bill Belichick as well. But Parcells is a fascinating guy, and Paul, you spent so much time with him, watching all the practices, sitting at the Knights of the Round Table almost with him at his feet. Give me a favorite memory of Bill and some of the psychology of results as you reminded me he would teach you.
Yeah, one of the things that Bill would do was most often on Fridays because every day there was a press availability except for Tuesday, which was the players' days off. And so on Friday, if you came down to the press briefing, which might be at 11:30 or 12 o'clock, he did his 10 or 15 minutes, and then he would, sit there at the end of that long horizontal card table, puffing on his cigarettes, and he would say, "Okay, fellas, now put down the pads and the pens," and we would sit there for like an hour and just talk football. We talk strategy. We would talk players. We would talk about trades that, if hypothetical deals that he would want to kind of explore or that he heard of. He would talk about just the philosophy of the game and the playbook. I remember right then and there, okay, I remember Bill said something to me that I will never, ever forget. I take it with me to this day, and I tell everybody whenever they ask me to speak. Bill Parcells had something called the psychology of results. And what he meant by that was winning breeds winning, losing breeds, and I'm going to take it that this is a family show, so I'm not going to use the word. But he meant that, losers tend to stay losers and winners tend to stay winners. And the psychology of the results are very simple. He believed that there was a certain type of methodology, and a certain type of habit-forming momentum that that you had to have if you were going to be a certain way. And everybody wanted to be a winner. Nobody wanted to be a loser. And so that phrase and what he meant by that impacted my life. And still to this day, I think about it and I tell everybody all the time how important that is, because you have to have the right frame of mind and the right mentality and the right work habits at whatever you do if you're wanting to be successful. And so that to me, that's always been like my golden Parcells rule. But Lenny could tell you the guy had 100 of them.
Oh, more than 100. More than 100. He would always find these little innuendos to light somebody's fire or light a fire into somebody's behind. And his way to get to me was to get me to laugh first, then he hit me with the serious. He'd get me to laugh first, and he hit me with the serious. And then serious would be like, a challenge, but in a soft way, or he'd say something to me like, are you gonna be like the other guy that wore number 70, a one game wonder? And I said, what the hell's a one game wonder? Well, from one game to the next, you wonder which guy is gonna show up.
Yeah.
That kind of shit. So, but it was funny. It was funny, and at the same time, you kind of took it to heart. You took it to heart, but more importantly, you took it to head because it stayed in the back of your head, and as a player, and you kind of had to live with that.
Paul, why did Carl Banks call you the Parcells Whisperer?
Well, because after many, many years, when Carl joined the Giants broadcast team, and I've been now officially part of the Giants organization's broadcast team now for the last 11 years. So now Carl and I actually work together very closely. So, I guess Carl, after a certain amount of time, got tired of me constantly talking about different things that Parcells taught me, whether it would be sayings or philosophies or just old stories. So finally, he just said one time we were on the television set together, and he goes, Paulie, you are the Parcells Whisperer. And Banks cracked up, Harry Carson cracked up, Bob Papa cracked up. They were all in the studio with us. And ever since then, it's stuck. So I'm the Parcells Whisperer because, as Banks says, not everybody wanted to listen to him as much as you did, but clearly you did because you retained all that stuff.
Now, Bill Belichick should have replaced Parcells as the head coach of the Jets, was for a day. Should have replaced Parcells as the head coach of the Giants. Tell us the story why Bill Belichick didn't get the job and Ray Handley did.
Well,
and you don't have to adhere to a family story. You can use whatever language you want to tell us this story, because Belichick definitely...
No, it's really quite simple. I'm going to simplify it because there are a lot of tentacles here. But to simplify it, George Young was of the opinion, and you have to understand, the Giants general manager at that time, George, had complete authority to hire the head coach on his own. That's the way that or structure the organization was set up. He got to make that call without any approval. It was his call. He believed that Bill Belichick did not have the personality skills to handle the locker room or to handle the pressure outside with the fans and the media and all the other types of things that were non-X's and O's related to the football team. And consequently, because George felt that way, he was never going to give Bill Belichick the head coaching job. So that's really the bottom line, more than anything else. And as it turned out, if you really look at it, when Belichick left the Giants and took the job with the Cleveland Browns, that didn't go so well, did it? I mean, I understand.
He got him to the playoffs. Yeah, he wasn't.
Yeah, but he was not well liked in Cleveland. As you know, he had a lot of problems barbering back and forth with the media. He was not very well liked out there, even though he did get them to a playoff appearance. That's correct. But I think when you consider New York is a different market than Cleveland, the struggles and some of the rough spots that he had there were nothing compared to what he might have had as a Giants head coach.
I do remember him with the Cleveland Browns. I was covering the AFC for NBC. And Kevin Byrne, who was the fine PR guy, I think he did a TV show with the head coach Belichick with Cleveland. And he had someone there to assist him in the dealing with the media. And obviously that wasn't his strength at the time, and he would grow into it. And I could buy not giving Belichick the job for those reasons. But then what they did hire, Ray Handley, was not great, as it turned out.
Well, the problem there, and Leonard could tell you, Ray was the running backs coach, and he was a extremely smart individual. All right, he did have a very high IQ and a high football acumen. He was also the time management guy for Parcells, and George just felt that his cerebral football knowledge was the guy. Because remember, when Bill left, Bill had resigned after the draft that spring that we're talking in 91. And so at that point, the Giants were a little bit in the lurch because it was like, what are you going to do? Every organization's pretty much already set. So Bill resigns in part because of his health.
The heart.
Yes.
The heart stuff, yeah.
Well, he was a chain smoker and he was overweight. You guys know that. I mean, is it any, that's not the surprise.
Wrong.
So in any event, the heart thing is what put, and there are other things too, but the heart thing was a big issue. And so Bill resigns after the draft. And at that point, they had to promote somebody from within. And George just felt that Handley had the most, he was the most capable from a mental perspective. Of course, the mistake that George made there is that Handley did not have the proper personality or people skills either. And Leonard could tell you that did not go well.
No, it did not go well. I got to tell you, it did not go well. And we were extremely curious as to why Bill Belichick didn't get the best shot at the job. I mean, because we all, we loved Belichick. We had good rapport with him. Everybody on both sides of football respected him. And, when Bill made the announcement that he was going to leave, we felt so strongly that, Belichick was the heir apparent to replace him. When they said they were going to hire Ray Handley, all the players looked and shook their heads and went like, what? Are you kidding me? So, everybody seemed to be baffled and went all the way into the next season. Me and Paul, I don't know if you remember this, but I was still pissed off and bitter from being in Bill Parcells' doghouse all of 1990 for him sitting me out for the first 10 weeks of the season.
Yeah.
I was a holdout and starting John Washington and ruining my consecutive start as the right defensive end of the Giants. And then, not starting me until game 10 or game 11 against San Francisco, which we lost on Monday night. So I wanted to come back with a vengeance. I didn't give a damn who they put in as a head coach. I wanted to come back with a vengeance to show the football world that I still had a lot of gas left in my tank and a lot of stuff that I wanted to still prove, not only to myself, but to the fans that, came to watch the game and paid their good money to watch Leonard Marshall do his thing.
Well, I think in retrospect, Leonard, we would all probably say that Ron Earhart probably would have been the better selection at the time. You remember right. Ron stayed around for a year as an offensive coordinator, but in truth, I can't imagine that he would have done worse than Ray. Oh
no, Ron Earhart would have been an excellent choice as well. I mean, he had good rapport with Sims. He knew offensively what kind of football team we had because he was the guy calling the shots. And I would tease him week in and week out. We're going to run it today, or we're going to shoot today. He goes, big boy, you're going to be happy. Just go play me some defense. So that was real cool. So, but the 91 season, I still feel bad because I thought that team had enough gas in its tank to win another Super Bowl. We just didn't have the right damn leadership in order to do it.
Hey, now that we're talking about that 91, 92 period, Paul, can you relay the story that you were telling me before we started taping about the torn Achilles with Lawrence Taylor, how it was going to be his final season, but he didn't want to go out that way with the torn Achilles?
Yeah, Leonard, I don't know how many of your teammates knew that, Lawrence did really plan to hang it up after the 92 season, but that's really what his plan was. And the thing, there were a lot of rumors about it, but I don't know if anybody really thought it was serious. But Lawrence wasn't kidding. He really meant it because he had not had any fun playing under Ray Handley, like most of you guys did not. all the fun was out of the game when Parcells had left. So he basically he felt like he was tortured playing for Ray for those 2 years, and he was going to leave. And then of course he tears his Achilles in that game at Giant Stadium in the East End, right by the East End zone. And I'm sure you remember him being carted off, and all of us were just devastated. And Lawrence absolutely made up his mind right then and there. He was not going to be carted off the football field to end his career. He would not allow that to happen. So he had made up his mind that whatever rehab was gonna be involved, and they told him it was gonna be long and hard and nasty. He's like, no, I'm gonna do this, and you can testify to this too. Lawrence worked his ass off that off season to come back for '93 because up until that point, he was not a workout warrior. He was a guy with the natural physique and the natural strength and the natural everything. But that off season, he had to work his ass off because he was coming off the torn Achilles. And of course he did. Dan Reeves gets named head coach, restores some luster to the franchise. And as it turns out, Leonard, Phil, and Lawrence, when they walked off the field after that playoff game in San Francisco, that turned out to be the last game they both played.
Yeah, I mean that was extremely interesting because, if you recall, I left and I kind of knew that, once I left the team that, that whole thing between Lawrence and I and that chemistry that Lawrence, Harry, and I had playing opposite one another, and the way we covered for each other in terms of playing in the run game, playing in the pass rush, being playmakers in the scheme of things of our defense. I knew that would change, and I knew that would put a lot of pressure on Lawrence, and he didn't have that go-to guy to help him week in and week out to help elevate his game and motivate him to play better. And I look back on it, hindsight, maybe I did cut it too short with the Giants. Maybe I should have stayed a little bit longer. I would love to have done that, but at that time, I just had such a bad taste in my mouth for things between, the way I got treated in '91, having to always fight for money to get paid the money I thought and felt I deserved because of my play, spoke volume in terms of what I did for our scheme of things of our defense and the championships I helped us win. There was just too much against me that made me say to myself, Leonard, this is the best decision you could possibly make. Stay here and play football. So I just felt, I felt, half of my body wanted to be there, and then half of my heart wanted to be somewhere else, and it was just such a bad feeling. So that whole thing with Hanley and Parcells leaving and Belichick not being the guy, or even Ron Earhart not being the guy, and just the breakup of what we had, the nucleus of what we had as a football team, it really took a toll on a lot of our players, man. A lot of the really good guys that worked so hard for the Giant organization.
Well, Leonard, if Bill had stayed, if Parcells had stayed, if he had not run into some of the heart and medical difficulties he had, you guys could have won at least one more, maybe even two.
Probably could have. I have this conversation with Phil Simms all the time, Paul. I have this conversation with you.
Yes, I know.
And the hard part about it is, when I look back on it, Paul, I laugh. I have tears of joy because we got a chance to give that old man Wellington Mara, what he had longed for 30 years in 1986. That man wanted to stand there with that trophy, and he wanted to stand there proudly, just like George Halas did back in the day. And he deserved it. He deserved it because he trusted a bunch of guys, in particular, a bunch of young guys who cut their teeth with a gritty, tough, demanding football coach from Hackensack who only wanted to make $1 million in his career. And he ended up making $40 million coaching football. But he only wanted to make $1 million when he told his friend Chicky Centrella.
And driving that Mercedes-Benz to work every day.
That's right. And And so I am just so honored that I had the opportunity to be part of that and be part of that legacy associated with Bill Parcells.
Paul, almost 4 decades covering the Giants. Leonard and I may be prejudiced. Which is the best of the Giants teams?
1986. Case closed. Period. End of story.
Okay, I think so too. Okay, here's a more difficult one. Eli or Phil?
That's very difficult. You're right. It's incredibly, incredibly difficult. Phil Simms is always going to, have a very soft spot in my heart because when I first started covering the team as a rookie in '83, Phil and I hit it off incredibly well. And I've often said to people, I have to say number 11. In fact, when I see him, I always say, hey, how's it going, number 11? Because he's number 11 to me. And personally, he's my favorite Giant of all time. I can't dispute that. He's my guy. But if you're going to ask me, player, I think you probably have to say that Eli Manning is the greatest Giants quarterback of all time. I think you have to say that because of his longevity, because of his durability, and the fact that he did get the 2 Super Bowl MVPs. We all know what Phil did for the team in 1990, and we all understand that. But unfortunately, the injury allowed Hostetler to win that ring against Buffalo. So I'd say for career accomplishment, you'd have to put Eli ahead of him.
Yeah,
All right, I got one question. A question.
Go, Leonard, go.
Why isn't Leonard Marshall in the Ring of Honor?
I can't answer that, Leonard. I don't get the call. I don't get to make that call. But you know what? Let me just say this. I have never, ever, ever understood those kinds of things, what the criteria are, because I've never seen the criteria. So I have no idea what the criteria is. What I do know is that you were a great and legendary Giant. That's what I know. Beyond that, I have no idea what the criteria are.
Well said. Hey, Paul, actually, if the 86 team was the best, even though they didn't win a Super Bowl, that 85 team that lost to the great Chicago Bears, they had to be one of the top 2 or 3, right?
Yeah, I think the 85 team, and I've talked to a bunch of those guys, and I know I've talked to Phil Simms about it, and George Martin, and Carl Nelson, and a whole bunch of guys about it. And Leonard can that was the year he was NFL Defensive Lineman of the Year. Yeah, Leonard, that was his real mega monster breakout season. And the Giants go to Chicago, and I tell people all the time they gave the Bears the toughest game of that postseason. More so than any other team did in the playoffs and the Super Bowl because they just rolled over everybody. Now, I know the score was 21-0, but let's not forget something, okay? There was a costly Rob Carpenter fumble near midfield. There was a drop touchdown pass by Bobby Johnson, which wound up leading to a missed field goal by Eric Schubert. You remember him, Leonard?
Correct.
He shouldn't have. Listen, that was Parcells' mistake. And I talked about that with Leonard. And fourth, and such a short field goal attempt at the end of the first half, down 7-0, 4th and goal, you go for it to tie the game. You don't get many chances against that great Bears defense.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because Bill learned from that, though, because he became much more of a 4th down gambler after that game.
Yes, he did.
So I think for a lot of reasons, that game really did wind up planting the seeds for what became the great era of Parcells' Giants. But I tell people all the time, the Bears did not dominate that game. Yeah, they won. The final was 21-0. The wind conditions were horrible. We know about Landetta's muff punt. But I just named for you, 3 other plays that were of tremendous significance in that game that, could have made that game much more competitive on the scoreboard, on the field. The Bears, if they're not lying, they will tell you the Giants were their toughest foe.
Yep. I couldn't agree with you more.
Paul, we could do this all night, and we're going to have to do it again sometime. I can't thank you enough.
I would love that. This guy told you this guy right here was the guy. The glue. The glue.
Oh, appreciate it, Leonard. Thank you.
And Leonard, this guy has so much energy and passion after covering this team for so many years. And I just wish he would be rewarded with a few more good teams before he decides to pack it up.
Me too.
And,
I got to tell you something. If the Giants,
You know what's funny, guys? Keith Hamilton every once in a while, visits, with a lot of the other alums, and I see Leonard every once in a while as well. And Hammer keeps laughing every time he comes back. He keeps laughing. He goes, "Paul, you're still here?" And I'm like, "Yeah, Hammer, I'm still here." And he goes, "You still look the same." I said, "Hammer, just remember something. My body didn't take the abuse that the players' bodies take because you guys were on the field and you had to leave it all out there on the field. I just had to flap my jaws and my gums for the last 40 years."
Paul's great. And Leonard, we'll see you soon on another episode of Lenny and Elliott's podcast, When Giants Were Giants. Thanks, guys.
thank you, fellas.
Thank you.